This is Modern Persian Food,
a culinary podcast for today's food enthusiast.
We talk about classic Persian flavors,
modern recipes,
and embracing culture and identity through food.
I'm Bita.
And I'm also Bita.
Welcome to our show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 122. Today, we're joined by a special guest, Rachel Kashef of Little Persian Learning. We're talking about blending Persian culture into bicultural families. We're really excited to have you here all the way from Michigan virtually. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Hi, Rachel June. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on our show.
Thank you for having me. It's really an honor.
You know, this is a topic that is of great interest to many of our listeners. We have folks that have come to us and asked us questions specific to how can we blend culture into young families and in a positive way. And so interested in learning more. You come from a teaching background. You have 3 young kids yourself. So we'd love to hear about kind of your journey. What brought you to your business? And let's just go from there.
I'd love to talk about that. And before we start, I just want to say one thing I thought of is that I hear from a lot of people, as you said, you do. And I think that this podcast is going to hold value for people who do come from a bicultural family, but also just persons on their own who might be half Iranian or Iranian, but didn't learn to speak Persian. I hear from a lot of these people, whether or not they have kids. I do have a kid-centered business, but I hear from a lot of people that are just partnered with non-Iranians or maybe just trying to figure out the Persian language themselves as an adult. And I think all of this kind of is applicable to so many people.
People really are looking for a way to kind of connect and bring their families on the journey, really. So it's kind of like, like how can we celebrate some of these traditions and celebrate the language in a way that's going to work for our families? Like I personally, my husband is not Iranian, so we have conversations about this like almost daily about how, the differences of cultures and how we can kind of embrace really the great things from our respective cultures and from our community and our neighbors and the communities that are all around us. We live in an urban setting, so we kind of have a lot of like different people around us. And it's a great way for us to share about Persian culture too, especially with the big holidays, that those are maybe like good springboards that we can start sharing just what it is to be Persian, what it means to be Iranian, and those tenets and how they are pillars in our lives.
Yeah, naturally, we mostly talk about food being modern Persian food. But, even so, every guest and, almost every person who listens is interested by this cultural connection aspect. So, I would just love to hear why you personally and how you personally got interested in the Persian culture and wanting it to bring it into your life.
Sure. As far as the language goes, my husband's Iranian American. My in-laws came here pre-revolution. And to focus on my husband for a little bit, because that's the connection here to the Persian culture, his family, they did not speak Persian consistently at home. Both of my in-laws came here and they were finishing school, working all the time, perfecting their English, which they already knew, but it wasn't a huge focus, especially because, and I think a lot of people will relate to this, they did not grow up in a community where there was a huge Persian community. So there's not really a great reason to continue it. And using my teaching experience, bringing that up here, this is something that even though I can't relate to that because English was my first and only language, I used to see this all the time in the classroom. I came from a city that had a big Arabic speaking population. And so we had, even though it was a suburban district, we had a lot of ESL for students that came from upper middle class homes where they spoke predominantly Arabic. And then they came to school and they were embarrassed by it. And that was my husband's situation. He did not want his peers to even hear his parents speaking Persian. So he kind of jokes about that when he was a kid, the fastest way to get them, he and his siblings, that is, to behave was for his parents to speak in Persian. And then they just straightened up because they wanted it to stop and they didn't want any attention brought to them.
I love it.
But it also breaks my heart because I could see that happening when I was a teacher and I could see students who spoke Chinese or Arabic or other languages and they didn't want attention brought to them. They put up with people mispronouncing their names or
Mm-hmm.
not completely understanding the directions in English and not raising their hand or asking for clarification just because they didn't want to bring attention to it.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm in the same boat as what your husband went through growing up in an area in the Midwest that didn't have a huge population versus where my husband was here in California and the other Bita June was here in California. It's a little bit different situation, but for us, it's this huge need to assimilate. And you don't even know that you're doing it, because you're a kid,
Yes.
but you just want to be like everybody else.
That generation as well, there was current events that were kind of like made it hard to have pride in like where we were from and things like that too. So I think in the early 80s, there were like a lot of things happening in current events that kind of was like, oh, I don't want to necessarily be associated with certain of the things that were happening. So I get it. And my name was butchered all the time. And I actually didn't even really think anyone had my same name until I then became an adult. And then I started finding people with the same name. And, ultimately I met the other Bita, and now there's a bunch of different Bitas that I know. So it can be really challenging, a really challenging time when you're growing up and trying to fit in. And there's already so many reasons that people can like get bullied and things like that. It's like, let's not add another layer of complexity to that.
Right.
So your husband, is he like me in that, like, I understand most things in Farsi, and I can kind of get my point across, but.
So his spoken Persian was not very good at all. He knew mostly phrases, a lot of slang, things that he would overhear his parents saying, a lot of just stuff that wasn't necessarily even conversational, like corrective things, like, okay, like, hurry up, let's go, those types of things.
Yeah. My friends growing up, my friend actually knew a couple phrases. One was like a knock on the wall, Behab, like go to sleep. Because we up giggling and talking, so she knew that one.
Exactly. So he knew a lot of those, and that kind of was a pivot point for us. When we got married and when I became pregnant with our firstborn, it actually wasn't even crossing our minds then, but as soon as my son was born, I think this moment of clarity came to my husband that there was all of this pressure on him all of a sudden that here there's, Persian culture is so old and the history that comes with it. And then all of a sudden he had this conversation with me where he said, this is it. Like, if I don't teach my kids Persian, anything that I don't pass on to them, like, this is the end. Like, yes, my parents came to America, but that is not what is going to end it. It's going to be that I didn't teach them, because his parents upheld traditions and holidays. And of course they speak Persian, and it all of a sudden he saw our son and was like, I have to give this to him. And so he realized that he wanted to start delving into the language because that's such an important part of it. And so I kind of realized that this was something, Bita, you were saying that you and your husband talk about this all the time. And it was something that we were talking about, and we realized we both value this. I come from a mixed background, various countries in Europe, and I knew very little about my family's history. You do social studies projects and things like that. And it's like, I'm from these countries, and, we had nicknames for my grandparents that were reflective of our heritage, but that's kind of where it stopped. The food, the culture, the holidays just became very Americanized, and I didn't know very much. And so as it became important to us for our son, it had to become important to me because I was home with him. There's not a big community where we are. There's not immersion preschools. There wasn't Persian classes. I mean, we were just like, okay, all of a sudden I was like, I have to learn this faster than my baby is so that I can be the one to teach. So that's how the language started. And anybody that's been to littlepersian.com lately has seen every Nowruz now I have something called the hands-on Hafseen, which is a reusable, here's everything you need in a box to teach a kid about a Hafseen, and you don't have to go chasing down senjed. You don't have to grow your own wheatgrass seeds, which, you can use Amazon. But at the time, I remember like being at a health food store, like, do you have wheatgrass or wheatgrass seed, and trying to find these. So the hands-on Hafseen's been something that's been really useful for our family to be able to have something that even our, 3-year-old, 1-year-old, whatever age at the moment they can touch it and really experience it.
Yes.
and learn about each item.
Yeah.
And it's in addition to the Hafseen that they're not allowed to touch.
Yeah.
I think that Nowruz and Hafseen is such a great one to bring into the classroom, having been a classroom teacher, because it's so easy to teach it and it's interesting. So I think Bita Jin, you've done it as well too. But I had cards, to kind of spell out in English
Yes.
with the S sound of the 7 things and to show it. And I would bring the costume and then we'd end with a dance and things. So it's really fun
cute
to introduce it.
Yeah, I think actually, Bita, I know at the beginning, because you definitely have been around since Little Persian first started. And I think you kind of helped me have the idea of a classroom.
Yeah.
Putting together something for parents to take. That was such a good idea. And so
Yay.
I did that for Nowruz and for Yalda. Yeah. And so it ended up being like a coloring page with the Hafseen, but also kind of a take-home letter, because I always feel like you hear about these special guests at school and you're like, oh, so-and-so's mom came to talk about Diwali or whatever, and you ask your kid and they're like,
right.
Like they can't remember what it was. And I'm like, well, I actually would be curious to know beyond the cliches that you see, So there's a little take-home letter. And that's just a free download on the website. But for parents to be able to, even if you don't go in to present, that you can just ask the classroom teacher, like, can I send in, a snack or send in, some Hafseen items, and the teacher would most likely be willing to do it. I mean, honestly, coming from a public school background, I felt like a lot of the teachers wanted to have more diversity, inclusion.
Exactly.
But they just didn't know what to do. Like, it's Christmas time. They're no longer calling it a Christmas party. It's a winter party. But throughout the rest of the year, they're like looking at these students that they know they have heritages that are first or second generation. And it's like, what can we share? And a lot of times the parents, there might be a language barrier or something. So I hope that a lot of families can use those resources to make it really approachable and know that teachers do want that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for what you're doing. Because a lot of times the way that cultures are introduced, it's just food. Like, okay, we're having International Day, right? Coming from the teaching background, like,
yes.
We're having International Day. So there's an egg roll and there's a rice and there's a, Yeah. But this is so much more. You're doing language, you're doing holidays.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only is it a good opportunity for parents to go and share in the classroom, but to be honest with you, my daughter, who is 8, has a really big sense of pride when it comes to her culture, and she wants to present like the Hafseen. She's done that over the last few years.
I know, it just gave me goosebumps. That's so awesome.
That's the goal.
Yes, exactly. So your hands-on Hafseen kit, I think, is a great way. I've seen it. My cousin has it. It looks really great, and it's reusable. So that's great because you can kind of invest in something and use it over the years, or you can just set that up at home if you want to have your own. The leading up to Hafseen kit, that's super cute too. I actually really love that because we've gone over Nowruz in previous episodes. We will have a great New Year's and Nowruz coverage coming up next month. But there's so many parts to it. There's the Charshamba Suri, setting up, cleaning the house, Khune Tikuni, and Nowruz itself, and then Sees the Bedar. So I love how that kit that you have kind of covers all of those steps of the pre-Nowruz and then the post-Nowruz and all of those activities.
Yes. And those activity boxes, those are new for this year, where it's just kind of, one-time use of crafts and things like that. And I think the idea behind that is that, especially for those of us that are not in big communities, I feel like it can be a little isolating to, we make a really big deal in our family about Nowruz.
Right.
And then you leave the house and it's like, nobody knows what this is, And so the activity box, I think, for me, the idea behind it was giving the kids kind of, not that crafts are what makes a holiday, but giving them some excitement and seeing it exist somewhere besides just their own home and their own family, and having, there's so much stuff that comes home from school for even silly holidays, like that hold little meaning nowadays, like St. Patrick's Day or thing, and they come home with coloring pages and all of this. So giving some kind of oomph to the holiday and some real fun stuff to do with it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. Echo what Bita was saying. Thank you for everything that you're doing to kind of bring culture to Persian families, hybrid families, non-Persian families. So thank you.
Yes. Let's talk about food.
So food is a great way to introduce people to our culture. every time we kind of have an event that there's non-Persians there, it's fun to incorporate Persian flavors so that people learn and are able to experience that. But how does that work to kind of like introduce culture in our families and in our communities?
It's the easiest conduit, right? It's the easiest connector.
I know a lot of people are like, Persian food is so hard to make. And then that's just the end of their story. And so I hope that some people will hang on, because
Yes,
I did think that. And I love to cook all different kinds of food. I love to eat all different kinds of food. And I think that I'm pretty like open-minded about, there's not very much I don't like. But when my husband, I had never tried Persian food. So when he was like, oh, Gorma Sabzi, you have to try my dad's Gorma Sabzi. And my head like exploded when I tried it. I had never tried anything like it before. And I recently was talking to my mother-in-law, laughing about how, you know, in American culture, it's like you go to a restaurant and there's like a little sprig of cilantro on the side of your, you know, food, or like a piece of parsley. And it's like
garnish,
not even like meant to be eaten. And then I tried Gorma Sabzi, and I had just never tried anything like that, like the massive amount of herbs. And it was so good.
Herb explosion. Can you cook it?
I can now.
Oh my gosh.
But I will say that, like, for my own style of cooking, I incorporate a lot of different styles, but I'm not a huge recipe person. So that was a huge challenge for me, that we all know, like, oh, I tried to get my mom's, like, you know, whatever, you know, Horish Crafts recipe, and it's a little bit of this. And that's exactly what I found too. And so then I'm like, how do I do this? Because I'm not familiar with cooking with fenugreek or all these fresh herbs, and I don't know how to ad lib as I'm going with these things that I'm not familiar with. So actually, your podcast was a great way to like bring everything down, approachable. Yes. I think we started off around the same year. I got in at the beginning, and you guys do such a good job at making it approachable, and like, what is it like in an American kitchen to incorporate these things? And also on busy schedules, we all know, I mean, I wanted to learn how to make a tahdig traditionally, and I spent the first like year and a half doing that. And like, this is with young kids at mealtime. It is so much to time a tahdig at the same time that you're making the rest of the meal.
exactly.
I think the key is to get a rice cooker that does it for you.
Right. So I felt like it wasn't fair to get a rice cooker until I actually knew what it took. So it's funny, but I held off on getting a rice cooker till I could actually do it myself. And I was like, okay, I've earned this.
Yeah, you're a worker.
And now I use a rice cooker because I have 3 kids, and it's a tool that allows me to cook Persian more often, because if that's set, then I can actually make, you know, a meal that takes over an hour.
Set it and forget it. Yeah.
Yes. I would say I try to make a good home-cooked Persian meal once a week, and then we all know the leftovers are good for a whole nother night. You just pop another tahdig in the rice cooker and serve it again.
I love it.
Good for you.
And a little tradition that we've done at our house for a long time is that we have kind of a Persian-inspired breakfast on Saturdays. And so that's kind of become something special on the weekends.
I love it.
What is a Persian-inspired breakfast in your family?
We kind of do like, you know, the Nuno paneer. If it's summertime and I can get fresh herbs at farmer's market or something, we'll do that. Sour cherry jam, walnuts, cucumbers.
Lovely.
So we kind of set out a smorgasbord of whatever we have that's Persianish the morning of, and we kind of have a leisurely noshing breakfast and have time to chat. And
I love it. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's become special, and it doesn't have to be hard. And I hope that that's everyone's takeaway, is that you don't have to start with Gorma Sabzi, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I've had a lot of people contact me even about food through Little Persian. Like, how did you learn how to make Persian food? Or how did you learn how to make tahdig? Like, go online and get a Pars rice cooker.
Yes.
Yes.
And serve the tahdig. Like, don't get caught up on whether you made it yourself. And, you know, the breakfast, like, start with what you can. Like, it doesn't have to be a Persian jam. It doesn't have to be, you know, a special cheese. Like, get a feta, get some walnuts, cut up some cucumbers, and get whatever flatbread you can. Like, we don't have sangak where we are. but we get what we can. And a lot of times we're using pita, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. I love that. I love it how you can really use food to really introduce the culture to your friends, to your family. And this has been great. I really enjoyed learning about your journey, learning about Little Persian. Where can people find you and your resources?
So littlepersian.com is our website, and I try to keep that the central hub as far as we have a blog and all our products, and I try to make useful blog posts. And also, if you're on social media, we're on Instagram and Facebook. It's Little Persian Learning on there. And then we have an email list, and you can find that if you just go to our website on the very bottom. There's the email list, and we keep it brief. We don't send out a lot, but I do send out when there's important things and try and put new resources, new releases, things like that.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I just remembered one resource that you had provided before. Didn't you compile a huge list of national schools that teach Farsi?
I did. So I'm trying to make our blog posts things that, again, the work that we've done, how hard was it to find a Persian school or Persian tutor? It was really hard. And oftentimes they're so small, or a woman who's a retired teacher and is doing this out of her home or out of a community college or something really small. So
right.
I really reached out to everyone that I knew in the community, and then also to our followers, to find if you are using somebody and you like them, please let me know. And I've made kind of a constantly updated list. Yes, that's on our blog. So if you just go to littlepersian.com to our blog, you'll see a Persian school directory, I think it's called, and trying to keep that up to date so that people don't have to dig so hard for information and they can get connected.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. This was fun.
This was a pleasure. Great talking to you. Thank you, Rachel June.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Until next time.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Bita June.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Modern Persian Food Podcast with Bita and Beata. Thanks for spending time with us. If you've enjoyed what you heard today, consider telling a friend or giving us a good rating. You can subscribe to our show for free on your favorite podcasting app, or find us online at modernpersianfood.com or on Instagram for the recipes and information we talked about today. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and see you next time.